Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we're coming here to talk about some more great Kentucky history. Joining me is Miss Sally Rogers. She is the Curator of Collections and Development at the South Union Shaker Village. It is about 15 miles from Russellville. She's going to give us a lot of good information and so forth about this piece of Kentucky history. Miss Rogers, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we're going to get into the history and so forth of, maybe a little bit of unknown for some people around the state about the Shaker Village at South Union. But before that, tell us a little bit about your Kentucky connection and so forth.
So my Kentucky connection is pretty recent. Born and raised in Tennessee, actually just right over the line in Sumner County. Um, and I started interning at South Union Shaker Village back in 2014 when I was still an undergraduate. And then after I graduated from graduate school, a couple of years later, I started as the curator about 7 years ago. So I now live in Kentucky. So I am a Kentuckian now. I've been one for a few years now. But my connection goes back about 10 years as an intern at South Union.
Okay, well that's pretty good. I will not hold the Tennessee connection against you. I mean, you're on the border, so it's close enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So where do you want to get started here with the South Union um, Shaker Village? And before that, I'm in Central Kentucky. I know a lot about the Pleasant Hill, the Shakers at Pleasant Hill, and so forth. And we've done a few episodes, and authors have come on and talked about that. But I don't know much at all about South Union. So,
Yeah, and that's I hear that quite a bit actually. A lot of people say, "Oh, we've been going to Pleasant Hill for many, many years." A lot of people didn't know that there was another Shaker Village in Kentucky. So I'm excited to get our name out there and
mhm.
tell people that about the history and the relevance of South Union because, South Union was at one point as bigger than Pleasant Hill. Today we're a smaller community, but we can get into more of that history later and how it ended up there. But first, I thought I would start off by asking you a few questions.
Mhm.
Um, and I would like to sort of dispel some Shaker myths that not just about the Kentucky Shakers, but as the Shakers as a whole. So the first thing is, and you can tell me true or false or what you think. So the Shakers are an offshoot of the Quakers.
That's a false.
That is false. So we are a little bit of background again here. We're celebrating 250 years of Shakers in America this year. It's a big celebration for us.
Yeah.
The Shakers, they're still around and they're older than our country. And so they had a big conference for it back at the beginning of August because August 6th is landing day. And
Mm,
so, myself and the director, we were up in Maine celebrating with the Shakers. And Brother Arnold, who is a Shaker, he has been there since the 70s, I believe, maybe the 80s. Um, but he gave a really good history of the Shakers, and he dispelled this myth that the Shakers came from the Quakers. But he said if you look at the pastors and the preachers and the sermons that they were following in England, it springs from Methodism. So the Shakers
mhm.
actually sprung from the Methodist movement in England in the 1740s.
Yeah, yeah. Now, just because it rhymes does not mean
Right,
it is.
right. Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, yeah.
The next one is that the Shakers invented the circular saw and clothespins.
I don't know either or on this. I'm just gonna say true.
So it's kind of a trick question.
Uh-huh.
There's a myth that a Shaker woman, a Shaker sister, invented the circular saw because she was inspired by the treadle foot on her sewing machine, but that had not been invented yet at the
Okay.
time. So
Okay.
there is a later patent for a type of a circular saw. There's lots of patents for different types of circular saw. So it's not one and done, she invented the circular saw. She submitted a patent for a circular saw. And the other one, the clothespin, is kind of tricky. It's a little bit of a misnomer, and I've got a visual representation here for you. So this is peg rail. What we call today is peg rail, and you see this at every Shaker village. It's ubiquitous among the Shaker communities, and they're usually hung about 3/4 high up the wall. And the little pegs or pins that go in them, the Shakers call them clothespins. So that
Oh,
is the clothespin that the Shakers are
okay.
known for.
Okay. Well,
Um,
there you go.
yeah. And my next one is Shaker furniture is plain and simple.
I, I'm gonna say false because some of it is pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's another trick question. So if you look at Eastern Shaker furniture, it is very plain and simple. But if you're looking at Kentucky Shaker furniture, it looks much more regional, for people who are interested in decorative arts. Southern furniture has a very, distinct style, especially Kentucky furniture, and so the people who were joining the communities, they were coming into the villages with their skill sets that they had in the world. So that's why Southern Shaker furniture has is much more decorative, much more turnings than you would see, up in New England.
Mhm.
So it's yes and no. It is plain and simple, but then again, it's not.
Yeah.
Um, and
It's
then the last one is
also very durable. It's
yes,
very well put together.
yes, very much so. And then the last one is the Shakers died out, quote unquote, because they were celibate.
I'm gonna say true because that's what I've always heard.
Yeah, that's what people have always been told, but it's false.
Oh,
The Shakers are a celibate society, but the Shakers and those in the museum world, in who work at Shaker museums, we are trying to dispel this myth that celibacy is a death knell for a Shaker village closing. So there's lots of different factors. One of them, is particularly for South Union, being the railroad coming through. And again, we can talk about this more later in the history of the village. But the railroad comes through and it just takes young people away. It brings, it just opens up the world to people. And it's not just true for Shaker communities, but for rural communities
mhm,
specifically. You see that quite a bit where there's just sort of a diaspora of young people leaving because the railroad comes through. The Civil War really took a toll on the community at South Union, but the Shakers are a monastic lifestyle, just like the Catholic priests and nuns, and uh, almost every world religion has a sect of people who are celibate. Um, it's just unique that the Shakers, the whole religion is celibate. But I always tell people that having children does not guarantee your longevity, and you think about it too. Do you still, if you're a person of faith, do you still go to the same church that you were brought up in? Or do your parents go to the ones that they were brought in? So having kids is not a guarantee of longevity.
yeah, yeah. Well, that is, and I think that was that is definitely a myth that people don't understand. A lot of people I've heard them say, "Well, how did they even get more people?" Well, people just came and joined. You know,
Hmm.
they just left
Yes.
their lifestyle, changed over and so forth. And like you said, with religion, people change many many times, sometimes through their life. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
all right. Any more questions for me?
That's it. I'm done grilling you.
Well, so when we look at the history of South Union here, um, where do we get started, and how close does it tie to Pleasant Hill and so forth?
Very close. So, as I mentioned, the Shakers came to America in 1774 and they settled in New York and New England. And then in 1805, the New York village, the parent ministry, the central leadership, they send 3 missionaries on foot, New Year's Day, 1805, to make converts in this part of the country, what was considered the West. And so these 3 men head out again on foot. It's a 3-month journey, and they make converts first at Pleasant Hill in 1806, and South Union is established in 1807. So there's 2 Kentucky Shaker villages. There were 4 in Ohio, and there was 1 in Indiana. So they were pretty successful at making converts here in the West.
Yeah. Is that the only 2 in Kentucky?
Yes.
Just okay.
Mhm.
Alright,
Yes,
which a lot of
and a
people
lot of
probably thought
people.
that there was just 1, but there is 2.
Right. There were 2. And so just a general history of South Union specifically, again, the village is officially formed in 1807, and there were a few converts families who put their farms together, and then over time they started to build new buildings because their numbers were increasing, and at its peak South Union was actually a 6,000 acre farm. So
Wow.
it was the largest farm in Kentucky at one point, and there were over 225 buildings that we have documented that were there at the community. So it was a really large
Yeah.
settlement.
Yeah. Now and so did, who was the leading people that found or who was the people, I guess, that started it off? I mean, names-wise.
Um, so if people are familiar with the history of the Great Revival in Kentucky,
Mhm,
then they may be familiar with John Rankin, who was with the Gasper River Meeting House. The
mhm.
Gasper River Meeting House was just across the highway. What is now 6880 was just across the highway from where we are now. So John Rankin and his family and a lot of the people from his congregation were some of those early converts at South Union.
Wow, yeah, John Rankin, that's a he's another, uh, very important, Kentucky well, he wasn't born in Kentucky, but did a lot of work in Kentucky as well, that, people need to know about.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So they're they're slowly building buildings. There in 1810, they built a new center house, center family, and it's a small little frame building. And then 1813, they're building a bigger brick building. And then 1822, they start building a large center family dwelling house, which is, exactly what people picture, when they go to Pleasant Hill, the large stone dwelling. South Union has a large center family house just like that, except ours is brick, it's not
Yeah,
stone.
and now did they separate men in one house, women in another house, pretty much everything?
Same building. So in a Shaker community,
Okay.
men and women are living in the same building. There
Mhm.
is an invisible line that runs down the middle of the building, and you've got one side is for women and one side is for men.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And, as far as let me ask you this, and this might, like, not be there might not be an answer, but was there, like, a blueprint for, "Okay, this is how Pleasant Hill was set up, we're gonna set it up just like that," or was it just completely organic in its own way?
They are, um, they're separate. So we don't have any written floor plans or architectural plans of the dwelling house, the center house, but it's a very Southern style architecture, and so I think that that is influential in the center houses of Pleasant Hill and South Union. It's a T plan, a center hall, very typical for what you see for the 1820s, 1830s. So I think region and time is more influential than what the other Shaker village is doing. Now there was a Shaker from Pleasant Hill who was an architect, Micajah Burnett. He came to South Union a couple of times, and he actually stayed for quite a bit at one point early in the history of the community because he built a cistern, a large cistern at South Union. So he did come down and he planned one of the structures there. Um, and there's also a note too, just as an aside, that one of the elders, Harvey Eads, writes in the journals that our meeting house was 2 feet longer than the meeting house at Pleasant Hill. But I think if you measure the footprints, they're actually the same.
Uh, well, you gotta get your victories when you can, I guess,
The Shakers, that's something we try to tell people, that the Shakers were people too. They're not perfect just because we're looking back at a religious society. They're people too. And so you see in the journals, there's always this sort of one upism.
Yeah.
happening between the two communities.
Oh, well, and that's another thing. I mean, was it pretty much like, I mean, did they communicate a lot, work together a lot with different things? Um,
Yes. The Shakers are going back and forth between Pleasant Hill and South Union quite a bit, and they're under the same central leadership from New York. So anytime the ministry from New York or anyone from any of the eastern villages comes down, they're always going to Pleasant Hill, they're going to South Union, and the two are working together quite a bit as well. And at one point in the later part of the 19th century, I don't know the exact years, but there's actually what they call a Kentucky bishopric. So they were under one leader, and that was South Union elder Harvey Eads. He went and lived at Pleasant Hill for a short time. So the bishopric didn't last very long. I can't tell you the exact reasons why. I think it was just difficulties in having someone else come and lead you from a different community. But yeah, it was about 18 months that there was the Kentucky bishopric. And then Harvey Eads came back to South
okay,
Union.
yeah, okay. Um, Now with all the well, I mean, that makes a lot more sense that it is kind of set up a bit more with, I think sometimes people kind of think that they're just their own little hubs,
Hmm.
but they were all connected and so
Hmm.
forth.
Yes.
Yeah. Now as far as how long or, I think Pleasant Hill was it like 1920-ish when it sold, when it was finally sold, or the Shakers, I guess, dispersed, or how long was South
So
Union?
Pleasant Hill closed in 1910. The Shakers at Pleasant Hill decided themselves that they were going to close the community. They closed in 1910 and they sold the village. The new owner of the property said that the Shakers could live there for the rest of their lives. So Mary Settles dies in 1923. She's the last remaining former Shaker. She's in 1923, she's not a Shaker anymore. They all ceased to be Shakers in 1910, but they are living in the village until they
Yeah.
die. So she dies 1923, but South or Pleasant Hill closes in 1910.
Mhm.
South Union closes in 1922. So
Okay.
what happened then is the parent ministry, again from New York, they came down to the village because there were only 9 Shakers living at South Union at that point, and they said, "You're not functioning as a Shaker village should with just 9 members."
Mm,
So they said, we're gonna close the community, and you've got 2 options. You can either take train passage to New York and live out the rest of your days as a Shaker with us, or you could take $10,000 per person and go live in the world, which
mhm.
today is about $150,000 each.
Wow.
It was, yeah, it was a nice sum of money for
Wow.
them. So 7 people took the money, and then 2 of them took train passage to New York. And actually, of the 7 who took the money, there was a man and woman who married and bought a house in Auburn, just about 3 miles up the road, bought a
Oh,
new
wow.
house and furnished it with all new Sears and Roebuck furniture.
Well, so they went into the world.
They went into the world, and they were in their 40s and 50s, which
Mhm.
at the time was considered elderly. We
Yeah.
would never say that today. But, yeah, so they married and again lived together, and I think it was just more of a matter of companionship.
Mhm.
I don't think there was anything romantic there. I think it's just we've been Shakers for so long, and to start
Mhm.
over on your own would be difficult, and that's just my own beliefs that, it's a matter of companionship.
Yeah. Yeah, now what I think of when I think of the Shakers and so forth, here I live here in Lincoln County, and, we got a pretty strong population of Amish and Mennonites, here in our area, and when I think of the Shakers, I feel like during that time, that's kind of what they would have been similar to. Now, obviously, they're not the same, but, like, being, this community inside of, the state or the county that, is a little different. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess tell us a little bit what made a shaker, I guess.
Yeah. So I think if you were to look at it in the context of a group that's just different, then yes, they could be seen as, Amish or Mennonite, but the Shakers are totally different in their beliefs. One, just right off the bat, the Shakers embrace technology. So, the Shakers at South Union put electricity in the building. They
Mhm.
were the first in Logan County to own a car. They They put plumbing in the building, and they used all kinds of machinery and technology that would make their work faster, more efficient, cheaper, etc. They also are very progressive, and these are the beliefs that we really try to impress upon people, that the Shakers believe in equality of men and women and equality of races, which is incredibly progressive for the early 19th
Oh, yes.
century,
Big time.
especially where we are in the state. We're right there on the line of Tennessee, and it was not a popular belief. It did not make them popular with the outside community. So there was this kind of belief, or this, I don't want to say fear of the Shakers, but I think the surrounding community just kind of felt that they were always, there was, I think, some jealousy because the Shakers were really prosperous. They made really good money. They had, nice buildings. And so it was just always a little bit of contention between the Shakers and the outlying community.
Yeah, and that I could see that you all or Logan County is in that closer to Tennessee, closer to South or the South, I guess if you want to say it in that way in
Hmm.
the Civil War terms and so forth. Um, and oftentimes people get upset when there's a group of people who are being very successful, and it's
Hmm.
hard to um, well, it causes problems. But was there ever any kind of situations or any kind of um, uh, violence or anything like that, or any?
Yeah. So lots. Before the Civil War, during, after, during the war, one of the eldresses at South Union, Eldris Nancy, many people know, especially in our part of the state, they know Civil War history because Eldris Nancy kept a great diary from 1861 to 64. She writes that she feels something important is happening
Yeah.
on the brink of the Civil War. She writes basically, someone needs to write this down. Something big is about to happen. So she keeps a really detailed journal of what's going on because the Highway 68 even then ran through the middle of the village. The Shakers called it the Great Road. So throughout the course of the war, there are both Union and Confederate troops who are moving through the community, and they're both making demands on the Shakers. They are knocking on the doors in the middle of the night saying, "We need bread for 600 people in the morning. We need breakfast for 400 men." Because when you
Oh,
see this community with all of these huge buildings, armies know that these people can literally feed an army, whereas the little log cabin with a dirt floor right up the road, they can't supply for this many people, but the Shakers can. So that really took a toll on the resources of the Shakers. Um, there are posses who would ride through, who would, throw bricks through windows, or I think there's even an instance of someone shooting a gun into one of the buildings. Nobody was hurt, thankfully. But after the Civil War, the KKK came through and they burned the Shakers Mill, which was a huge loss on them financially, not just for the fact of the building itself. It was a massive building, but that was a big industry for the
mhm.
Shakers.
Was
And
that
so
was that done just off of I mean, spite as far as their success, or more of their beliefs, or do you know?
their beliefs, it was their beliefs. Um, you know, it, the Shakers at South Union were fully integrated by 1822. So they had free African American members sleeping in the same bedroom as their white members. And, for where we are in Southern Kentucky, I think the surrounding community really had problems with that. Um, if I'm not a Civil War historian by any means, but if I remember correctly, Russellville is where the Confederates decided that Kentucky would secede. And we know that there were Texas Rangers who had
Mhm.
come through South Union at that time. I I can't find it written down, concrete evidence, but we know Rangers came through South Union, and I think they were in Russellville as a form of protection. Um, so they're in a hotbed of
Yes.
contention there in the state.
Russellville and Bowling Green were big spots.
Right, we're 10 miles from Bowling Green too, so we're right there smack dab in the middle, Russellville, and then Bowling Green's the Confederate capital for a short time. So the Shakers were afraid. They were very afraid. There were even there's an instance of a couple of different men who were so afraid that they were going to be conscripted to fight for the Confederacy that they said, "I'm leaving," and they wanted to remain Shakers, so they went to Union Village in Ohio. The Shakers gave them each $50, which is today about $2,000. But they gave them $50 to escape to Ohio because they were so, they did not want to fight for the Confederacy. They did not believe um, in the Southern belief of slavery. So, yeah, it there's lots of instances of just contention, like I said, with
Yeah.
the community.
Yeah, but like you said, that's very progressive, that integration at that early. I mean, 1820. I mean, that's pretty early, and I could see and
Mhm.
understand that the local people would not be too happy about that. And
Mm-mm.
uh,
No, not at all.
yeah, well, so what? Any other? I mean, anything else like big major events through the history there, as far as them making and let's talk about some of the stuff they make. I mean, what do y'all have there at South Union that people could come and check out and see?
Yeah, so today there are 9 original structures that are left out of the 220 plus buildings that were there. And a lot of people wonder, how did that happen? So when the community closed in 1922 and the Shakers left, there was a large auction. And there was a gentleman from Louisville who bought the bulk of the property that still had buildings on it. And he began to tear down buildings that he didn't have a specific use for. One building, everyone at Pleasant Hill knows the trustee's office. It's where you can stay the night and have a great meal there. Every community, every Shaker village had a trustee's office. That's where you would go and do business with Shakers. If you were someone of the world, you could stay the night there. But the new owner, he it's not confirmed, but it burned mysteriously,
Ah,
you
yeah.
know, in January of 1830 or 31, sometime in the early 30s. It burned mysteriously. He tore down the Shakers meeting house, so that's their church. He tore that down, and in 1926 built his vacation home on top of it. And
Oh,
out the back window of where he built his new home on top of the meeting house, you could see the cemetery. So he took up the Shakers headstones from the cemetery, ran them through a rock crusher, and used the lime to fertilize the fields. So today there's only one monument in the cemetery. That's one that the museum we put up about 10 years ago. And there's about 450 people buried back there. We used ground printed trading radar again about 10, 11 years ago to see where people are buried and what are the perimeters of the cemetery. So again, about 450 people buried back there. And we do have a list of who is buried in the cemetery as well.
wow. Oh, keep going if or is that
Yeah.
oh, okay.
No, so yeah, he tore down quite a bit, but again, anything that's left standing, he had a specific use for. So today, when you come, you go through the museum, which is what we refer to for the center house. It's a four-story building, all the way from cellar to attic. You can go through and you can explore the building, and you can see period settings. I like to phrase it as, if the Shakers just left in 1850, this is what it would have looked like. You can see some of the photographs of some of those buildings that were no longer standing. Um, we've got all different kinds of exhibits to try to educate people. That's our foremost mission, is education. We want people to learn about the Shakers, not just the furniture. Everybody knows Shaker furniture, but we again want to impart more than just the furniture and the architecture, but their beliefs in equality. That's what we really want to talk about too. So we've got a few exhibits that talk about their belief in equality of men and women and equality of races as well. And then we've got, a few other buildings as well that are open for people to go in and look through.
That's good, and that's and like you talk about, this dispersing or getting rid of those myths that people have
Mhm.
and so forth, and it is a very interesting um, a part of Kentucky history and the U.S. history as well, because they're not just in Kentucky, um, but it goes to show, kind of how times have changed, um,
Mhm.
and some of those beliefs that they had were very progressive, but very true, and even though it's taken a long time, and some of them still need work or assistance or needs to improve. It's
Absolutely.
you know it's 200 years old. The Shakers, well, 250, but South
Mhm.
Union would be about 200 years old or so plus.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, they're just such an important part of Kentucky history, and, a lot of people ask us too, "Well, how do they make money?" People wanna know that, they wanna know the financial aspect of it, and so Shakers, they're great capitalists.
yeah.
So, with 6,000 acres of farmland, it's pretty easy to know where's their money coming from. They're farming. The Shakers had some of the best cattle in the country. Um, we have one little building there, and it's just a tiny little building, but it's great. I think it's one of the only examples of this in the state, but it's called the steam house. And so the Shakers figured out that if they steamed the feed mixture for the cattle, it opened up those some of those seeds and those nutrients, and so the cattle could digest it better. So they had shinier coats, they kept fat on longer, which is important for long drives before the railroad comes
Mhm.
through. So Shaker cattle brought top dollar at auction. So they would eat that steamed mixture for 6 months, and then they would graze for 6 months of the year. The Shakers at South Union also made silk. They produced silk. It was an industry that it was the women really enjoyed. It never really made a whole lot of money for them, but it's these vibrant pinks. We have some examples of the silks that they made, these beautiful pinks and purples, and they're kind of iridescent. And a lot of people, think that the Shakers, they kind of associate them with like dull and drab colors. But when
Mhm.
you come to the village, we've done a lot of paint analysis, and we're trying to overpaint in some areas to show the floors are chrome yellow, and in one building in our ministry shop, and the woodwork is this brilliant orangish red color, and this again another really bright mustard yellow on the base or on the chair rail and peg rail. So the Shakers were not afraid to embrace color and use those bright colors in their daily lives. They're not a drab, boring group of people, and you can see that again in the architecture in their silks. They painted their furniture some of those bright colors too. Um, so yeah, again, in
Yeah.
the silks, you see the pinks, and I just love looking at them. They're so beautiful. They made brooms,
Mhm.
and they sold seeds. Lots of people know seed packets, and the Shakers were actually some of the first to invent that do seeds in that individual seed packet. Not at South Union. There's two communities, Shaker communities in the Northeast that kind of say we did it first. No, we did it first. But I always say at South Union they did it really well because
Yeah.
they made thousands and thousands of dollars off of their seed industry. And so they're selling up and down or down the Mississippi River, and then they get to New Orleans, and then they would, come back up north. And again, they're just bringing back thousands of dollars on
Yeah.
these seed peddling trips.
Yeah.
The Shakers are also producing alcohol. A lot of people wouldn't expect that with the Shakers. I hear a lot of people say when they visit, they go, "Well, celibacy and alcohol really don't go hand in hand," and I guess not. But again, they're Kentuckians, and they're gonna make whiskey. They're making whiskey, which they call it whiskey. It's aging for about a month, so it's probably more akin to moonshine. But they're making wine. They're making hard cider and brandy. And they actually get reprimanded a little bit from the New England ministry, from the New York ministry, because they're drinking too much.
Oh.
It's supposed to be for medicinal purposes, but they're using it a little bit more than they probably should.
Do you think, and as you've talked about this, and I think that how did they make money sounds like just not too good of a question. Is obviously they had to do something. They were doing something. They
Mhm,
did it. They made money just like everybody else. But do
mhm.
you think a lot of people have the view that these Shaker villages in South Union or so forth is just that they just isolate completely and they just shut off everybody else? Do you think that's a view people kind of think of it?
I think at the time when the Shakers were still active in Kentucky, there probably was that belief. Again, how are they so prosperous? How are they so successful? Yeah, I think there's always skepticism regarding a group of people that you're not in on it, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, nowadays, I think it's just natural curiosity. Well, how do they function?
Uh-huh.
People ask us at the museum itself, they ask me, "Well, how does the museum make money?" So I think it's just natural curiosity.
Oh, well, so let's talk a bit about like how what are the hours of the museum? How can people come and what do they need to do to or what can they expect and to which you've
Yeah.
covered some of it, but
Yeah, so whenever you come, we're open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. You'll come for a self-guided tour of the village. We find that people really enjoy having the opportunity to explore on their own. You can linger where you are more interested in some of the topics, so you can pass over if there's something that you're not so interested in. So it's a self-guided walking tour of the village. Again, most of the exhibits are in our center house, so you'll spend most of your time there. But when you come, most of the furniture that you see, about 95% of the furniture that you see was either owned by the Shakers at South Union or made by the Shakers at South Union. We've got a couple of pieces that are from Pleasant Hill, but we try to collect only South Union furniture. So you'll come explore on your own. We today own 500 acres of land, so we're kind of protected really nicely from the growth and encroachment that's coming from both sides of development. And so we are kind of like an oasis out there. It's really peaceful and beautiful, being surrounded by right now it's seas of soybeans. So, yes, we're open, like I said, Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. And I would suggest that people plan to spend an hour to an hour and a half going through the village. So, when you come, we'll give you a brief orientation, then give you a map and let you explore the grounds on your own.
okay, well, yeah, that and seasonal or all year round?
We're open year round.
Okay, good.
We're closed, like I said, every Monday, and
Mhm.
we're closed all major holidays.
Yeah, yeah. So if there's one thing that you would advise people to come see, what would that one thing be that they have to check out?
Gosh, it's hard to pick because, as a curator, and, I've been there
To
so
see 'em all.
long, it's all just incredible. But I would say the ministry shop. It's a gem of a building. It's where the ministry lived for part of the year, but that's the building that the floors are this beautiful, brilliant chrome yellow, and everyone is shocked when they go in, and they go, "That can't be authentic," but it is, and we've done that paint analysis, and so, yeah, I would say if you've got 10 minutes, if that's all you've got, go and see the ministry shop.
Yeah, and, well, I mean, everybody just needs to go down there and check it out anyway. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, Ms. Rogers, thanks a bunch for, coming on here and talking about the pleas or the Shakers at I said Pleasant Hill. The Shakers at South Union. It sounds like a great place that people who are interested in Kentucky history really need to go down there and check. Like I said, about 10, 15 miles from Russellville and Logan County. And I'm of course I'm sitting here in Lincoln, which is a bit more central, and there's just so much more history to Kentucky outside of the bluegrass,
Mhm.
going west, and even into farther western Kentucky, that people need to get out and check out. Um, anything else before we go?
Yeah, I'll say one thing, if there are people who can't make it out for whatever reason, we have lots of information on our Facebook page and our website. We do a video series right now called Objects from the Outer Branch. Because South Union was so far from the central ministry, there's a manuscript from the early 1800s where they refer to South Union as the outer branch of the vine. And so, this video series, we are highlighting objects in our collection that we are not typically out on display for people to see. So, and they're just short, usually 3, maybe 4 minute videos. And if you are more interested in decorative arts, we did a series for about 2.5 years of videos. Again, they're all online, but it was called Furniture Friday. And so we highlighted a piece of furniture from the collection and gave a history of it, and really detailed about how it relates to the Shakers at South Union, and their own ways of making furniture and their own lifestyle there at South Union. So it's a great. I hear so many people say, they say we miss Furniture Friday because we quit doing it about 2 years ago, and they say bring it back, and we've got a finite amount of furniture in the collection to do. So yeah, maybe people will, start to love objects from the Outer Banks as much as they did Furniture Friday.
Yeah, but that sounds a very catchy name, and I agree with them. Bring Furniture Friday back.
We'll do
Uh,
what we can.
yeah. Now, you mentioned the Facebook page. Any other way to contact or get in contact with you all?
Instagram as well, and then our website is southunionshakervillage.com.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for coming on, and we'll try to get or push or encourage everybody to come down there and check out what's going on down there in South Union. So,
Thank
thanks for
you.
coming on, and thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Appreciate it.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.